This is Miss Hadi. I'm going to teach you the Tang Dynasty in 5 minutes. You can go over this information in Traditions and Encounters, Chapter 15, but this is just a quick little summary of the most important points. We started to talk about the Tang Dynasty after I told you that the Sui Dynasty fell, largely due to widespread discontent over conscripted labor, which is forced labor on projects such as the Grand Canal, and military reversals that made people really unhappy. Military reversals, for example, in Korea that prompted revolts and rebellions. Ultimately, this culminates in the emperor being assassinated in 618, and the Tang Dynasty would start. Now, the book really doesn't give you a lot of information on the first of the Tang rulers. The first Tang ruler, Li Yuan, was also went by the name Gaozhou. You don't need to know much about him. The emperor that you need to learn a lot about is Tang Taizong, who was the second emperor of the Tang Dynasty, a ruthless man by some accounts who murdered 2 of his brothers and thrust aside his father to take the throne. But when he came to power, he's going to be known as a very conscientious ruler, and under his leadership, the Chinese government would do very well. He's going to institute 3 policies in particular that are actually continuities from the Sui dynasty that will make him very successful and make his leadership very successful. He's going to build a big capital at Chang'an. He sees himself as a good Confucian ruler. During his rule, people reported that banditry ended or at least declined. The price of rice was low. Taxes levied on peasants were very low, to a 2.5% effective tax rate. They still had to do some compulsory labor, which meant that they actually were giving more than just those taxes. But basically, there was an overall period of stability and prosperity. And again, one of the reasons for that is the earlier Sui dynasty policies the Tang dynasty continued. One of those policies was continued support for transportation and communications. For example, they used roads and human runners and horses to communicate information over long distances in the Chinese dynasty, even to get fresh seafood into cities 600 miles inland. Another policy they continued was the equal field system, which was a way of dividing up land, agricultural land, to make it more equitable or equal so that you would prevent the concentration of land in the hands of the wealthy elite. So basically how it worked was 1/5 of the land that families owned would become hereditary, meaning you could pass it on to your kids. But the rest would have to go back to the state for redistribution based on the fertility of the land and other reasons. And it worked pretty well for about a century. And then by the 8th century, we start to see some problems with this equal field system. For example, corruption. That means they were bribing officials or getting favors from officials to find ways to retain control over the land, intimidating the officials. Another reason that it stopped working as well was because they lost some of that land when people donated it to the Buddhist monasteries. It fell out of the equal field system. That's another thing that I wanted you to learn about. And then the third policy that they continued from the Sui dynasty and did better than the Sui dynasty was a continuity of the Bureaucracy of Merit. This was something that was actually started way back in classical times in the Han dynasty, and it's going to continue for a long time. It's going to continue all the way until the 20th century or the 1900s with the Qing dynasty. Basically, this was a Confucian system of education that was based on literature and philosophy, and you had to pass these really strenuous, difficult exams called the civil service exams. Most people advanced on merit, means they earned it, although there was some bribery or some nepotism, meaning people passed without necessarily earning it because of who they knew. For the most part, people advanced through merit, and it's going to build loyalty to the dynasty as these people take offices and become bureaucrats. I think that this is going to lead to people who work for the government, bureaucrats, servants of the state, and make them educated. So this is going to be something that really helps allow for civil service to continue and to be strong during the post-classical period. The last thing I want to mention is the Tang Dynasty's expansion. And we see, for example, it expanding into territories like Manchuria, Korea, Vietnam, and parts of Tibet. It's one of the largest expansions in Chinese history. They also established something called tributary relationships. Tribute is like a gift. And basically, they established the system where neighboring lands would come and basically perform rituals and bring gifts to recognize China as the Middle Kingdom, this powerful realm that they were supposedly subordinate to. They would perform a ritual called the kowtow, which is a ritual of prostration where subordinates knelt before the emperor and touched their foreheads to the ground. And this is going to do a lot to strengthen the relationship, both diplomatic and economic, trade, cultural relationships between the rulers.